Someone built a 6-foot fence overnight and blocked off my grandfather's favorite fishing spot, then slapped a private property sign on it like they owned the whole lake. Welcome to Lakeview, a neighborhood so peaceful, even the passive aggression wears pearls. The HOA president says it's about community standards, but when your garden gets more rights than a 78-year-old grandpa, something smells fishy, and it's not the lake. What started as a stupid fence turned into something way bigger, and yeah, things got muddy. Stick around, because this isn't just a story about lake access, it's about control, pride, and consequences. Comment below where you're watching from, especially if your HOA is just as dramatic. It all started on a sunny Tuesday morning when I was visiting my grandfather George. At 78 years old, Grandpa had been living in this lakeside community for over 20 years. The small lake behind our neighborhood wasn't just water to him, it was his sanctuary, his morning coffee companion, his place to remember my grandmother who passed away 5 years ago. Every morning, he'd walk down the familiar dirt path, carrying his old tackle box and folding chair, settling by the water's edge like he'd done thousands of times before. But that Tuesday, something was different. Instead of the peaceful sound of water lapping against the shore, I heard Grandpa's confused voice calling my name. "Luke, son, come here and tell me what you make of this," he said, standing in front of a brand new wooden fence that stretched across what used to be his path to the lake. The fence was about 6 feet tall, painted in that pristine white that screamed expensive and untouchable. A shiny metal sign hung on it reading, "Private property, no trespassing, by order of Lakeview HOA." My engineering mind immediately started calculating angles and property lines, but my heart just saw an old man being denied his simple pleasure. Grandpa stood there with his tackle box in one hand, looking lost and confused, like someone had just moved all the furniture in his house while he was sleeping. I walked over and examined the fence more closely. This wasn't some hastily built barrier. This was professionally installed, with concrete footings and proper hardware. Someone had spent serious money to block this path. "Grandpa, when did this go up?" I asked, running my hand along the smooth wood. "Must have been overnight, son. Yesterday evening I walked down here just fine, and this morning—" "Well, you can see for yourself." The hurt in his voice made my blood start to simmer. This path had been used by residents for decades. My grandfather had been walking this exact route since before some of these newer residents even knew this neighborhood existed. Within an hour, I was standing in the perfectly manicured front yard of Sophia Reynolds, our neighborhood's HOA president. Sophia was 38 years old, recently divorced, and had the kind of artificial smile that made you check your wallet afterward. Her house was a monument to suburban perfection. Every blade of grass the exact same height, every flower arranged like it was posing for a magazine cover. She answered the door, wearing gardening gloves and a sun hat that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. "Oh, Luke dear, what brings you by on this lovely morning?" she asked, but her eyes were already calculating, like she knew exactly why I was there. "Sophia, there's a fence blocking the path to the lake. My grandfather can't get to his fishing spot." I kept my voice level, professional. "That fence is there for good reason, Luke. That old path was becoming an eyesore, and frankly, it was making our community look less refined. We've decided that lake access should be properly managed." She gestured toward her backyard, where an elaborate garden sprawled across what had to be half an acre. Roses, tulips, ornamental grasses, and a small fountain created a display that belonged in a home and garden magazine. "As you can see, when we take care of our properties properly, the whole neighborhood benefits. Sophia, my grandfather has been using that path for 20 years. He's not hurting anyone." "Well, Luke, times change. If residents want lake access, they can pay the new recreation fee. It's only $50 per month per household. Very reasonable for such a beautiful amenity." $50 might not sound like much to someone with Sophia's perfectly maintained lifestyle, but for a retired sailor on a fixed income like Grandpa, it was grocery money. "This is ridiculous, Sophia. That path has been there longer than half these houses." "Luke, dear, I understand change can be difficult, but the HOA board has made this decision unanimously. Frank Williams and I are in complete agreement that this is best for property values." That evening, I attended the emergency HOA meeting Sophia had called. The community center was packed with residents, most of them looking confused about why they'd been summoned on such short notice. Sophia stood at the front like she was addressing Parliament, not a neighborhood meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss the recent security improvements around our lake area. Some residents have expressed concerns about our decision to properly gate the lake access. Her eyes found mine in the crowd as she emphasized concerns like it was a dirty word. Frank Williams, our 50-year-old accountant neighbor, sat beside her, nodding along, but I noticed something in his expression, a flicker of discomfort when she mentioned unanimous decisions. The previous access point was not only unsightly, but potentially dangerous. Unregulated foot traffic, no proper oversight, no maintenance standards. Sophia's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been told no in her life. When I stood up to present the old property deeds showing the path was a legally established right-of-ways, Sophia barely glanced at the papers before dismissing them. "Luke, these old documents are hardly relevant to our current community standards. We need to think about the future, not cling to the past." The way she said old made it sound like ancient history instead of legal property rights. As the meeting ended with no resolution, I watched Sophia practically float back to her garden paradise. But that's when my engineering brain started working on a different kind of problem. See, I'd noticed something during my walks around the neighborhood. Something about how water flowed through our community that Sophia probably never bothered to understand. If she wanted to play games with my grandfather's happiness, maybe it was time she learned that some games have consequences she never saw coming. The next morning, I found Grandpa sitting on our back porch, staring toward the lake he could no longer reach. His coffee had gone cold in his hands, and his tackle box sat unused by the door like an abandoned hope. "Grandpa, I'm going to file a formal complaint with the HOA today," I said, sitting down beside him. He looked at me with those weathered eyes that had seen decades of storms, both literal and metaphorical. "Son, are you sure this won't spiral beyond what we can handle? Sometimes when you poke a hornet's nest, you get more stings than you bargained for." His concern made me pause. This wasn't just about principles anymore, it was about an old man's peace of mind and a community that was slowly being strangled by one person's need for control. "Grandpa, if we don't stand up to bullies, they'd just keep taking more. Your fishing spot today, someone else's happiness tomorrow." He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what we were facing. "Then do what you think is right, Luke. But remember, some people fight dirtier than others." I looked down at Grandpa's hand resting on his coffee cup. It trembled slightly, not from fear, but quiet frustration. That tiny shake was louder than any yell. I wasn't just filing a complaint, I was drawing a line for him. Within an hour of filing my formal complaint requesting the fence removal, Sophia's response arrived like a slap across every mailbox in the neighborhood. Effective immediately, all common area maintenance fees will increase by $25 per month to fund enhanced security and beautification projects. It was a classic power move. Punish everyone for one person's defiance. Neighbors emerged from their houses with confused expressions, reading the notice that would cost them $300 extra per year because I dared to question the Queen's authority. Rachel stood by her mailbox, frowning. "This is about your grandpa, isn't it?" "Yeah, I'm sorry." "Don't be. She cited me for grass being 3 inches high. She's power tripping hard." That evening brought another emergency HOA meeting, this time focused on what Sophia dramatically called community security concerns. The atmosphere felt different. Tension replaced confusion as residents realized they were caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. Sophia had transformed the front of the room into a presentation area, complete with poster boards showing before and after photos of various neighborhood improvements that nobody had requested. "Ladies and gentlemen, our community stands at a crossroads," Sophia announced, like she was addressing a joint session of Congress instead of a neighborhood meeting. "We can either embrace positive change and rising property values, or we can allow disruptive individuals to drag us backward into mediocrity." Every time she said disruptive individuals, her laser focus found me in the crowd, as if I were personally responsible for every problem in suburban America. Some residents apparently believe that outdated access points and grandfathered privileges matter more than our collective security and property values. She clicked to a slide showing crime statistics from other communities, statistics that had absolutely nothing to do with our quiet neighborhood, but sounded scary enough to make people shift nervously in their seats. Uncontrolled access points invite vandalism, theft, and worse. By properly managing our amenities, we're protecting our families and our investments. Frank Williams occupied his usual spot at the front table, mechanically nodding at appropriate moments, but I was studying his body language more carefully now. When Sophia mentioned unanimous board decisions, his shoulders tensed. When she talked about community security, his eyes searched for escape routes. This wasn't confident agreement, this was the nervous compliance of someone being forced to dance to another person's tune. After the meeting ended with predictable non-resolution, I made a point of observing the social dynamics more carefully. Several residents avoided eye contact with me, probably worried that association might make them Sophia's next target. Others offered sympathetic glances but kept walking, unwilling to risk becoming collateral damage in this escalating conflict. The message was crystal clear. Challenge Sophia's authority and everyone pays the price. The next morning delivered a fresh surprise that showed just how far Sophia was willing to escalate this personal vendetta. Fresh concrete surrounded the fence posts, and new security cameras had appeared on nearby trees like electronic sentries, all aimed at the blocked access point. These weren't the basic security cameras you'd see at a suburban home. These were professional-grade surveillance equipment that belonged at banks or government facilities, not lake access paths. That's when my engineering background kicked into high gear, and I started seeing our neighborhood through completely different eyes. Most people look at a community and see houses, lawns, and streets, but I see systems, water flow patterns, drainage networks, elevation changes, and infrastructure connections. Our development had been built around the natural watershed feeding into the lake, and everything followed the fundamental law that water always flows downhill. I spent my lunch break that day mapping the community's water management system with fresh perspective, noting storm drains, utility access points, and the subtle elevation changes that most residents never notice. What I discovered was fascinating. Our stormwater system was a carefully balanced network of natural flow and engineered drainage, with the lake serving as the endpoint for everything flowing through our neighborhood. Most interesting of all was Sophia's elaborate garden paradise, with its complex irrigation and drainage requirements sitting right in the middle of this natural water flow system. She built her suburban kingdom on a foundation she didn't understand, relying on infrastructure she'd never bothered to study. If someone with the right knowledge wanted to demonstrate how interconnected these systems really were, there were definitely ways to make that lesson very clear and very visible. By evening, I had the beginning of a plan forming in my mind. Sophia wanted to control access to the lake? Fine. But she'd built her power base on a foundation she didn't comprehend. Sometimes the best way to teach someone about the limits of their control is to show them how quickly the ground can shift beneath their feet. That night, sitting with Grandpa on our porch and watching him gaze toward the water he could no longer easily reach, I made a quiet promise. Don't worry, Grandpa. Sometimes you have to get a little muddy to clean things up properly. Wednesday morning started like any other day in our suburban paradise, except I woke up an hour earlier than usual. While the neighborhood slept, I took a casual walk around the community with a small toolbox, the kind any resident might carry for minor home repairs. What neighbors didn't realize is that those stormwater access points I'd been studying weren't just for observation. They were designed for maintenance, and as someone with an environmental engineering background, I knew exactly how they worked. The beauty of stormwater systems is their simplicity. Gravity does most of the work, and a few strategic adjustments can redirect flow patterns in ways that look completely natural. Near the third storm drain on Maple Street, I found exactly what I was looking for: a water flow control valve that regulated drainage during heavy rains. It was designed to prevent flooding by controlling how quickly water moved through the system. With a few turns of my wrench, I could adjust that flow rate. Not enough to cause any real problems, just enough to make things a little more interesting in certain parts of the neighborhood. By Thursday morning, Sophia's garden was showing signs of unusual moisture. Nothing dramatic, just some soggy patches near her prized rose bushes and a slightly swampy smell near her ornamental fountain. I happened to be walking past her house when she emerged in her expensive gardening outfit, looking puzzled as she stepped around small puddles that hadn't been there the day before. How strange, I heard her mutter to herself. The weather's been perfectly clear. She spent the next hour examining her irrigation system, convinced there must be a leak somewhere in her elaborate setup. Rachel had agreed to help me document Sophia's reactions, not for any malicious purpose, but because we both wanted to see how long it would take for someone so obsessed with appearances to notice when things started going wrong. Rachel would casually walk her dog past Sophia's house throughout the day, noting changes and reporting back. She's brought in some kind of landscape specialist, Rachel told me that afternoon. Big truck with premier garden solutions on the side, Guy spent 2 hours looking at her drainage system and left shaking his head. Friday brought more moisture to Sophia's paradise. The soggy patches had expanded into actual standing water in several flower beds, and the ornamental grasses near her back fence were starting to turn brown at the roots. Sophia called an emergency HOA meeting for that evening, and the panic in her voice when she left the voice message was almost musical. "Residents, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Please plan to attend tonight's meeting at 7 p.m. sharp. This concerns the security and maintenance of our entire community." The community center buzzed with nervous energy that evening. Sophia stood at the front looking like someone who'd been personally insulted by Mother Nature herself. Her usually perfect appearance showed signs of strain, a small dirt smudge on her white blouse, her manicured nails showing traces of soil from her desperate garden investigations. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing what appears to be an act of sabotage against our community's infrastructure." The word sabotage hung in the air like an accusation looking for a target. "Someone has been tampering with our water systems, specifically targeting the areas around my property. This isn't just an attack on me personally. This is an attack on our property values and community standards." She clicked through photos on her laptop showing the soggy conditions in her garden, each image more dramatic than the last. The photos were taken at angles that made small puddles look like major flooding, and the lighting emphasized every brown patch of grass. This kind of deliberate destruction threatens everything we've worked to build in this community. Frank Williams sat beside her, nodding mechanically, but his eyes kept darting around the room like he was looking for escape routes. When Sophia said, "We've identified potential suspects," Frank's nodding stopped entirely, and he stared down at his hands. I realized that whatever Sophia was planning, she hadn't necessarily shared all the details with her supposed ally. "Luke Turner has been seen walking around the community at unusual hours, carrying tools and taking what appear to be measurements near our stormwater systems." All eyes turned to me, and I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "That's a pretty serious accusation, Sophia," I said, standing up slowly. "Do you have any actual evidence of wrongdoing, or are you just upset that your garden is getting a little muddy?" The word muddy seemed to hit her like a physical slap. Her perfectly composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing the fury underneath. "Evidence? My garden is being destroyed by someone who clearly has both the knowledge and the motivation to tamper with our infrastructure. The timing is hardly coincidental." "Maybe your drainage system just isn't as perfect as you thought it was," I replied with a slight smile. "Sometimes when you try to control natural water flow patterns, nature finds its own way. Gravity's funny like that. It doesn't really care about property values or community standards." The room was dead silent except for the sound of air conditioning and Sophia's increasingly rapid breathing. Rachel caught my eye from across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. She was enjoying this as much as I was. Sophia's voice rose to a pitch that probably scared dogs in the next county. "This community will not tolerate vandalism or destruction of property. I'm implementing immediate security measures, including additional surveillance and routine inspections of all common areas. Anyone found tampering with community infrastructure will face immediate legal action and potential expulsion from the neighborhood." The threat was clear, and several residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. As the meeting dissolved into nervous conversations, I noticed Frank Williams lingering near the back of the room instead of joining Sophia at the front. When she tried to wave him over for what was probably going to be a strategy session, he pretended not to see her and slipped out the side door. Interesting. Maybe Sophia's unanimous support wasn't quite as solid as she claimed. Walking home that night, I passed Sophia's house and saw her in her backyard with a flashlight, still examining her soggy garden like a crime scene investigator. The security cameras she'd installed to watch the blocked lake path were now joined by additional cameras pointed at her garden and the nearby storm drains. She was creating a surveillance network worthy of a military installation, all to protect her flowers from the terrible threat of extra moisture. From my bedroom window, I could see the glow of her flashlight moving around her garden well past midnight. Sophia was learning that when you declare war on nature, sometimes nature fights back in unexpected ways. And tomorrow, I thought with satisfaction, was forecast to be another perfectly clear day. Saturday morning's mail brought a certified letter that felt like a punch to the gut. "Mr. Turner, you are hereby notified that you are under investigation for willful destruction of private property and tampering with community infrastructure. Cease and desist all activities that may affect drainage systems, stormwater management, or any other community utilities. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and potential criminal charges. The letter was signed by Sophia Reynolds, but the legal language meant she'd escalated this far beyond neighborhood politics. She was bringing in lawyers, which meant my simple plan to teach her about power was about to get seriously complicated. Grandpa found me staring at the legal document. "Luke, this woman's trying to railroad you over her muddy garden?" "It's not just about the garden, Grandpa. She's trying to make an example of me." "Well, son, sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a price. Question is, are you willing to pay it?" I should have known the answer, but doubt slipped in fast. One wrong move and I could lose everything. Engineering jobs require security clearances and clean backgrounds. Criminal charges, even false ones, could destroy my career before it really got started. In my frustration, I misjudged a valve. Water surged through the wrong line, straight into the Johnsons' backyard. By noon, their patio was half flooded. I spent the afternoon helping pump it out, hands blistered and pride soaked. Rachel stopped by that evening. "They told me what happened. You messed up, and you fixed it. That's what separates us from Sophia. She never cleans up her own mess." Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Frank Williams stood on our front porch looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His suit wrinkled, eyes darting nervously, shoulders carrying the weight of secrets he could no longer bear alone. "Luke, can we talk? Privately?" We walked to the back porch where Grandpa couldn't overhear our conversation. Frank perched on the edge of a chair like he might need to run at any moment. "Look, Luke, I need you to know that I never wanted any of this to happen. The fence, the legal threats, none of it." His voice carried the weight of someone confessing sins that had been eating at him for weeks. "Then why did you vote for it, Frank?" "Sophia said the board was unanimous because she told me that if I didn't support her initiatives, she'd start questioning my bookkeeping for the HOA accounts. I've been doing those books for 3 years, Luke. Any tiny mistake could be twisted into embezzlement accusations." The picture was becoming clearer. Sophia wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a master manipulator who used fear and intimidation to maintain control. Frank wasn't her ally, he was her hostage. "Frank, what exactly did she threaten you with?" "She found a small discrepancy in last year's accounts. $23 that was recorded incorrectly. Pure accident. But she said it showed financial irregularities that needed to be investigated. She offered to overlook it if I supported her leadership decisions without question." "So she's blackmailing you." "I wouldn't call it blackmail exactly." "Frank, that's exactly what it is. She's using threats to force your compliance." Frank's shoulders sagged like someone had cut the strings holding him upright. "My wife doesn't know about any of this. If word got out that I was being investigated for financial misconduct, even false accusations could ruin my reputation. I'm an accountant, Luke. Trust is everything in my profession." That evening, I found myself questioning everything I'd started. The legal letter sat on my passenger seat like a loaded weapon, while I watched Sophia moving through her kitchen with confident energy. Maybe it was time to admit defeat and move on with my life before this destroyed everything I'd worked for. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Saw Sophia talking to the mailman today. She was asking about delivery times and whether he'd noticed anyone tampering with mailboxes." The paranoia was escalating. This wasn't about protecting her garden anymore. This was about establishing absolute control over every aspect of our community. The next morning brought the final straw. Posted on every mailbox in the neighborhood was a new flyer with my driver's license photo and the headline, "Neighborhood Security Alert." Below my picture, Sophia had written a detailed description of my suspicious activities, including walking around the community at unusual hours, carrying tools near stormwater systems, and demonstrating hostility toward community improvement initiatives. At the bottom, residents were encouraged to report any suspicious behavior to the HOA office immediately. Standing in my driveway, reading my own wanted poster, I felt something snap inside my chest. This wasn't about lake access or garden drainage anymore. This was about a bully who decided that anyone who challenged her authority needed to be destroyed as an example to others. Sophia had just made this personal in a way that couldn't be ignored or compromised away. I pulled out my phone and called the municipal water department. "Hi, this is Luke Turner. I'm an environmental engineer and I need to request the public records for stormwater management systems in the Lakeview subdivision. If Sophia wanted to play hardball with legal documents and public accusations, maybe it was time she learned that two could play that game. And unlike her threats and intimidation tactics, my approach was going to be backed by actual facts and real engineering expertise. That afternoon, I sat down with the official drainage plans for our entire neighborhood, spread across my kitchen table like battle maps. Grandpa looked over my shoulder as I traced water flow patterns with my finger. "What are you planning, son?" "I'm going to teach Sophia that when you declare war on someone, you better make sure you understand the battlefield first." Tuesday morning found me at Murphy's Coffee House, sharing an honest conversation with Frank Williams. He'd texted me the night before, asking if we could meet away from the neighborhood's watching eyes. Frank arrived looking like a man who'd made a difficult decision, his suit wrinkled from sleepless nights, eyes darting nervously, shoulders tense. "Luke, I can't do this anymore. Sophia's lost her mind, and I've been too scared to admit it." He pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table like evidence in a criminal trial. "These are the real meeting minutes from the HOA board sessions over the past 6 months. What Sophia's been distributing to residents isn't exactly accurate." I opened the folder and found myself looking at handwritten notes in Frank's neat accountant script, documenting conversations and decisions that painted a very different picture than the unanimous board decisions Sophia had been claiming. "According to these notes, you actually voted against blocking the lake access 3 times before finally agreeing." She wore me down, Luke. Every time I disagreed with her, she'd bring up that accounting discrepancy again. $23 became her weapon to control everything I did. Frank's voice carried the weight of months of accumulated resentment and fear. "But yesterday, when I saw that wanted poster she made with your picture, I realized she's not going to stop until she destroys anyone who opposes her." The meeting minutes told a story of escalating manipulation that went deeper than I'd imagined. Initially, Sophia had proposed temporary improvements to lake access, claiming safety concerns. When Frank asked for specifics, she deflected with vague references to liability issues. Each meeting showed her proposals becoming more restrictive, until temporary improvements became permanent barriers. "Frank, this shows she lied to the entire community about board approval. She figured nobody would ever ask to see the real minutes. Most residents don't care about HOA politics until it affects them directly." Frank pointed to one entry dated 3 weeks earlier. "I asked her to present alternatives that would maintain lake access. She said she'd consider it, then never brought it up again. But there's something else, Luke. Something that made me realize this isn't just about control." Frank's voice dropped to almost a whisper, and he glanced around the coffee shop like Sophia might be lurking behind the pastry display. "She didn't just want control. She wanted to flip the whole lakeside." He pulled out another document, a real estate consultation agreement dated 6 months ago. "She's been working with property investors, using her HOA position to create problems that would drive down property values so they could buy low and sell high." The scope of what Frank was revealing hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't just about a power-hungry HOA president throwing her weight around. This was a calculated scheme to manipulate our entire community for financial gain, using fear, intimidation, and manufactured problems to profit from other people's misery. Grandpa's lake access was just collateral damage in a larger real estate scam. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I finally realized that she's not going to stop with you, Luke. Yesterday, she cornered me after work and started asking questions about other residents who've complained about HOA policies. She's building a list of problem residents who need to be dealt with. Rachel's on that list because of her grass height citation. The elderly couple on Pine Street made the list for questioning the new mailbox regulations. By evening, I had a comprehensive plan that would turn Sophia's garden into a genuine swamp, while leaving every other property unaffected. It required more significant changes to the water flow patterns, but nothing that would cause permanent damage. The key was understanding that Sophia's elaborate garden drainage system was designed for normal rainfall, but had never been tested against sustained saturation from redirected stormwater. Wednesday morning brought cooperation from Mother Nature. Light rain created perfect conditions for testing my expanded water redirection plan. Using municipal drainage maps, I located 3 additional control points that would channel storm runoff directly through the natural depression where Sophia's garden was located. The changes were subtle but effective, opening valves that had been partially closed, adjusting flow rates along existing drainage paths. By noon, Sophia's garden was no longer just soggy. It was beginning to resemble an actual wetland ecosystem. Standing water covered most of her flower beds, and the expensive ornamental grasses were completely submerged in several areas. Her fountain, which had been designed as an elegant centerpiece, now looked like it was drowning in its own backyard swamp. The smell of stagnant water was becoming noticeable even from the street. Rachel texted me updates throughout the day that read like a real-time disaster report. She's been on her phone for 2 hours, probably calling every landscaping company in the county. 2 different contractors have been out there with pumps, but the water keeps coming back. She just started screaming at some poor drainage guy who told her the problem wasn't with her system. By afternoon, Rachel reported that Sophia had escalated to calling city utilities, demanding they investigate industrial sabotage of the municipal water system. Thursday morning brought the spectacle I'd been hoping for. Sophia emerged from her house wearing rubber boots and a raincoat, despite the fact that it was a perfectly clear day. Her prize garden now resembled a small marsh, complete with standing water, muddy pathways, and the beginning of that distinctive swamp smell that makes property values drop faster than a stone. That evening, Frank called with news that made my day complete. Sophia scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. She's planning to demand a special assessment from all residents to fund infrastructure repairs throughout the community. She's going to try to make everyone pay for fixing her swamp. Friday evening's emergency HOA meeting had the electric tension of a courtroom drama. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls and clustering near the doorways. Word had spread about Sophia's flooded garden, and people were curious to see how she'd explain the situation without admitting that her elaborate drainage system had fundamental flaws. Sophia entered like a general preparing for battle, carrying a laptop, a stack of printed materials, and the kind of rigid confidence that comes from believing you're about to destroy your enemies. She dressed for the occasion in a navy business suit that screamed authority and control. Her garden might be underwater, but her appearance suggested someone who still believed she held all the cards. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're dealing with an act of domestic terrorism against our community. The phrase domestic terrorism seemed to surprise even Frank, who was sitting at the front table looking increasingly uncomfortable. Over the past week, our neighborhood has been subjected to deliberate infrastructure sabotage designed to damage property and intimidate residents who support community improvement initiatives. She clicked to her first slide, showing before and after photos of her garden that made the flooding look like a natural disaster. This destruction wasn't caused by weather or system failure. It was caused by deliberate manipulation of our stormwater management systems by someone with both the technical knowledge and the criminal intent to weaponize our own infrastructure against us. Every eye in the room turned toward me, and I felt the familiar weight of being the center of unwanted attention. Luke Turner has been systematically tampering with municipal water systems in an effort to intimidate me personally and undermine the authority of this HOA board. Sophia's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd convinced herself that her version of events was absolute truth. Tonight, I'm not just seeking resolution, I'm demanding justice for these criminal acts. I stood up slowly, letting the weight of her accusations settle in the room before responding. Sophia, those are pretty serious charges. I assume you have evidence to support them? Evidence? My garden is a swamp, Luke. The timing coincides exactly with your complaints about the lake access policy. You've been seen near stormwater access points with tools. Being seen near storm drains with tools isn't evidence of sabotage, Sophia. It's evidence that I was checking municipal infrastructure, which any resident has the right to do. Furthermore, I continued, pulling out the folder Frank had given me, I've discovered some interesting discrepancies between what you've been telling this community and what actually happened in your board meetings. The room went dead silent as I opened the folder and held up Frank's handwritten meeting minutes. According to the actual records, your claim of unanimous board support for blocking lake access was a complete fabrication. Frank Williams stood up from the front table, and for the first time in months, his voice carried confidence instead of fear. Luke is correct. I never supported blocking the lake access. Sophia pressured me into compliance by threatening to accuse me of financial misconduct over a simple $23 bookkeeping error. The collective gasp from the audience sounded like air being sucked out of the room. She's been using intimidation and blackmail to control board decisions, then lying to residents about having unanimous support. Frank's confession seemed to unlock something in the room's atmosphere. Several residents began murmuring among themselves, sharing stories of their own encounters with Sophia's heavy-handed tactics. Sophia's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Her face flushed red, and her voice rose to a pitch that probably violated noise ordinances. "This is exactly the kind of conspiracy I've been warning you about. They're trying to undermine legitimate authority with lies and fabricated evidence." "Actually, Sophia," I said calmly, "there's something else the community should know about your garden flooding." I pulled out the municipal drainage maps I'd obtained and spread them across the front table. "These are the official stormwater management plans for our neighborhood. What they show is that your garden was built in a natural drainage basin that's supposed to handle excess water during heavy rainfall periods." The room leaned forward collectively as I traced the water flow patterns with my finger. "Your elaborate irrigation and drainage system works fine under normal conditions, but it was never designed to handle the volume of water that naturally flows through that area during peak drainage periods." I looked up at Sophia, whose face had gone from red to pale in the span of 30 seconds. "The flooding isn't sabotage, Sophia. It's what happens when you try to build a showcase garden in a natural wetland. Furthermore," I continued, "the lake access path you blocked, it was originally designed as an overflow channel for this exact drainage system. When you installed that fence, you disrupted the natural water flow patterns that have been protecting your property for decades. The implications hit the room like a physical wave. Sophia hadn't just blocked Grandpa's fishing access, she'd sabotaged her own drainage system." Rachel Green stood up from the middle of the room, her teacher's voice carrying clearly to every corner. "So you're telling us that Sophia created her own flooding problem by blocking the path that was supposed to prevent it?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. The municipal engineers who designed this system knew what they were doing. The lake access path wasn't just for recreation, it was part of the drainage infrastructure." The room erupted in conversations as residents processed this information. Sophia stood at the front, opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for air, completely unable to respond to the revelation that she'd engineered her own destruction. Frank Williams was nodding vigorously, clearly relieved to finally see Sophia's manipulative tactics exposed to the entire community. "There's one more thing," I said, waiting for the room to quiet down. "I've filed a complaint with the city planning department about unauthorized modifications to municipal drainage systems. Installing that fence without proper permits and environmental impact assessment violates several city ordinances." Sophia's expression shifted from shock to horror as she realized the legal implications of her actions. "The city is requiring immediate removal of any barriers that interfere with stormwater management systems. That fence comes down tomorrow morning, whether the HOA votes for it or not." The room began to buzz with satisfaction as residents realized that Grandpa's lake access would be restored not by HOA politics, but by municipal authority that superseded Sophia's control. Sophia gathered her materials with shaking hands, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like a house built on shifting sand. As she headed for the exit, her parting shot carried more desperation than threat. "This isn't over, Luke Turner. You'll regret crossing me." But looking around the room at the faces of residents who'd finally seen her true nature, I was pretty sure it was over, and the only person who would be regretting anything was the woman whose garden was currently serving as habitat for frogs and mosquitoes. Saturday morning dawned with the sweet sound of heavy machinery. True to the city's requirements, a municipal work crew arrived at 7 a.m. sharp to remove the fence that had started this entire drama. I watched from my kitchen window as workers with official permits systematically dismantled Sophia's barrier, returning the lake access path to its original configuration. The fence that had cost thousands of dollars to install was reduced to a pile of lumber in less than 2 hours. Grandpa stood beside me, holding his coffee cup and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Son, sometimes justice takes its own sweet time, but when it arrives, it sure is satisfying." By 8:30, the path was clear and the natural drainage flow was restored. Within hours, the standing water in Sophia's garden began to recede, as the system returned to its engineered balance. But the morning brought an even bigger surprise. While researching the municipal drainage requirements, I discovered something in the city planning archives that I hadn't shared with anyone yet. The original neighborhood development plans from the 1980s included a specific notation about the lake access path. It was designated as a permanent community easement that could never be blocked or privatized. Sophia's fence hadn't just violated drainage ordinances, it had violated the fundamental property rights that every resident had purchased when they bought their homes. Frank Williams knocked on our door around 10 a.m., carrying a thick folder of documents and wearing the expression of someone who'd been working all night. "Luke, I've been going through HOA records since I got home last night. There are things you need to see that will blow your mind." We spread the papers across our dining room table, and what emerged was a pattern that made my jaw drop. Frank pointed to a series of property transfer documents that I hadn't expected to see. "She's been systematically trying to buy up properties around the lake at below-market prices," Frank explained, his accountant's precision making every detail crystal clear. The blocked access wasn't just about control. It was about forcing property values down so she could acquire lakefront lots cheaply. The documents showed that Sophia had been working with a real estate investment group, using her HOA position to create problems that would make residents want to sell. "Frank, this is criminal conspiracy, not just embezzlement. It gets worse, Luke. Look at this purchase agreement." He handed me a contract dated just 2 weeks ago, an offer to buy Grandpa's property for 60% of its assessed value, citing access limitations and drainage issues as justification for the low price. She was planning to force your grandfather out and flip his property once she solved the access and drainage problems she created. The scope of Sophia's scheme was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. She hadn't just been power-hungry. She'd been systematically manipulating our entire community for financial gain, using fear, intimidation, and manufactured problems to drive down property values so she could profit from buying low and selling high. Grandpa's lake access was just collateral damage in her real estate scam. "Frank, we need to get this to the authorities immediately." "Already done, Luke. I called the district attorney's office this morning and filed a formal complaint. They're opening investigations into HOA financial misconduct, conspiracy to manipulate property values, and fraud." Frank's transformation from intimidated accountant to determined whistleblower was remarkable to witness. Sunday afternoon brought the final confrontation I'd been waiting for. Sophia appeared at our front door, but this wasn't the confident HOA president who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for months. This was a cornered criminal whose carefully constructed scheme had been exposed. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes had the desperate look of someone who'd run out of options and lies. "Luke, please, we need to talk." Her voice carried none of its usual authority, just exhaustion and desperation. "I know I made mistakes, but this has gone too far. The city investigation, the financial audit, the criminal inquiry. You're destroying my life." Grandpa joined me on the front porch, and his presence seemed to remind Sophia of just how many lives she'd tried to destroy for profit. "George, I owe you an explanation. The lake access issue got out of hand. I never meant for it to affect you personally." It was probably the closest thing to truth she'd spoken in months, but it was still wrapped in lies. "Sophia, you tried to steal my grandfather's property. This was never about community improvement. This was about getting rich off our misery." "I know how it looks, Luke, but the real estate market is complicated. I was trying to help stabilize property values by creating more consistent access policies." Even facing criminal charges, she was still trying to spin her scheme as community service. "You offered to buy Grandpa's house for 60% of its value, Sophia, after you created the problems that supposedly justified the low price." Her face went pale as she realized I knew about the property scheme. "Luke, that was business, nothing personal. Trying to force an old man out of his home so you can flip it for profit? That's as personal as it gets." Grandpa stepped forward, his weathered hand pointing toward her swampy garden. "Ma'am, you tried to steal my home and my happiness. Now you're drowning in the mess you made." The following week brought swift justice that was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. The district attorney's investigation resulted in multiple felony charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and attempted manipulation of property values. Sophia was forced to forfeit all profits from her real estate scheme and face potential prison time. Her house went up for sale within days, and she moved out of state to avoid the criminal trial. Rachel Green was elected as the new HOA president in an emergency vote that wasn't even close. Her first official act was to eliminate all the fees and restrictions Sophia had imposed. Most importantly, Grandpa returned to his morning fishing routine, walking down the restored path each day with his tackle box and folding chair, knowing that his home and his happiness were safe from scheming HOA presidents. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching a swamp queen drown in her own greed while justice rises to the surface like water finding its natural level.
QA Stories signing off for now, but the drama, it never sleeps. Tap that bell if you're ready for round 2.